Hi from Richard Miller. We're in the jungle. So the jungle's not that far from Melbourne this time, so we're in a garden, and we're with our old friend. So Jarek, hi.
Hi.
So this is your yard, your garden.
It is.
You like it wild, right?
I sure
wild
do.
and woolly.
Yeah, it's beautiful this way.
Yeah.
It's a lot to keep track of, so.
Yeah. No, you could just keep track of the parrots. There's some beautiful red and green parrots that come right up to the door and sit at your table, right?
It's beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. They came to say hello.
Right. So we've been out with Jarek a few times, and we've actually gone to a couple of circles where we just sit, basically, and see what's here. And in between that, we're singing and chanting and just singing in a very loving way. And so we thought, well, let's just sing now with our voices, with our speech voices. You know, we're just sitting here, we're silent, we're speaking, we're what's just here, and we're doing everything that's always happening anyhow. And
yeah. Well, one of the things we were talking about is, whether we can speak in a way similar to the way that music is created. And of course, we can't necessarily speak over each other in the way that instruments can, but it's interesting to explore the possibility of how we hear as well as what we hear. So we're very often focused on the meaning of the words, and of course the words convey concepts.
How we hear is sounds and melodies, and then what we hear is meaning and interpretation.
Well, there seem to be levels of meaning when people are dealing with concepts. Right. And so it's a question of, can we see these different levels of meaning, or can we transcend them altogether and see a deeper meaning?
No, you'd have to do that in a group, because I expect you to get when I shoot a concept, I want you to get it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you say, well, that's a lovely sound, I'd say, wait a minute here.
Yeah.
So there has to be some kind of an agreement or ground rule, or
absolutely,
or mutual enjoyment where we can just enjoy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and perhaps those ground rules are changing, and perhaps those ground rules are evolving as well. And
I just mean that we can have an agreement that we're going to play another game and see if we really can do it, or if it just devolves into the same old game of agreement and disagreement.
Yeah. Yeah. So, conversations can also be creative, perhaps in new ways, beyond simply agreeing and disagreeing, so that obviously we all want to feel that there's a level of agreement or harmony or resonance, but we can also allow certain directions to evolve, or just watch them evolve and see the conversation as being part of the evolution of this thing that's coming into manifestation.
What I was saying is, without a disagreement, then we don't really care about agreement too much, maybe. In other words, like when people disagree, then we say, no, don't disagree, come toward agreement. But if they wouldn't disagree, then they could just go off on in some form of diversity, and then that would be an enrichment.
Absolutely, and disagreement is going to continue to happen anyway. So it's not as though, we're trying to, by having some insight into these things that we're discussing generally, it's not as though we're trying to eradicate disagreement altogether, because it's going to happen, particularly where concepts are concerned. It's just a natural part of it. Everything that we witness has some degree of difference, and can be so minute that we can't even recognize it, or it'll be almost polar opposite.
So how does disagreement work? In other words, we figure like what somebody else sees or what somebody else wants to make part of their life will somehow rub over and bump up against our life. Maybe we have that fear, and then we say, okay, well, if they agree with us, we'll be safer.
Like the story of the boatman who travels up and down the river, and one day another boat collides into him, and he turns around and abuses the other boatman, gets really angry, tells him off, and feels a bit better about that at least. And another time the same thing is happening, and he hears a thud again and turns around angrily, and the other boat is empty. No one to be upset at.
We talk about emptiness. So maybe we can see it too. If we could see it, of course. I guess disagreement or upset comes from believing the other guy had a choice, and there was another guy there that had a choice.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's what we believe. But maybe it's an empty boat.
Sometimes it seems like instead of a choice, we have an imperative.
Mm-hmm.
You know, an imperative would be like probably based on our beliefs. If we have strong beliefs, we have to go toward that with our reactions.
Well, a belief could be a part of that imperative. In other words, there seems to be some compelling force. There seems to be an imperative, and then a belief is part of the structure of that imperative. Whereas what we tend to think is that this is believed, therefore this has to happen. But that belief is arising as a part of that imperative.
Where does the imperative come from then?
And we move into the realms that really can't be expressed, and I guess it's part of the joy of exploring these things.
See, I was construing it in a kind of an opposite way because my indication for that was that when I noticed that a belief changed, then that imperative changed too. And then I could even examine a belief and say, well, I'm going to toss that out because I'm really not very sure of that. And then that's got a lot of ramifications. That seems to change a lot. So
yeah.
I don't know if you're just saying they arise together.
Yeah. You see, because we can see it from within the perspective of thought, and we can perhaps see it from without the perspective of thought. And so from within the perspective of thought, that's exactly what's happening.
Say again, because I think within the perspective of thought, it seems like there's a reason and a cause and effect and all that stuff. Those thoughts are all in place, whether before or after, but somehow they're somewhere correlated.
Yeah.
And from without the perspective of thought,
then they're all part of that which is arising.
It just arises, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so then there's, from without the perspective of thought, there's no proof that thought has any potency whatsoever, right?
Yeah, and
it
no
seems
proof
like
is needed.
It doesn't. Seems like it doesn't.
Yeah, no proof is needed apart from just your own experience, just your own seeing.
So you sit with an instrument, in your case a musical instrument, and then, I don't know, a few changes come, quarter up, third down, this, that, or whatever. I'm just saying things that I don't know really what they mean, but some little ripple comes, and then from that can come, and then this comes. and then another toot 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 comes.
You mean like different melodies?
Different melodies or
Mhm.
different things, and that might be totally new, or they might just be something that was in a Beatles song or something like that. You know, a little phrase. These different phrases come.
Yeah.
So then, by sitting with that, and you can really explore the nature of creativity, perhaps.
Absolutely, yeah. And you can witness the music arising, and the instrument being the instrument, and yourself being the instrument. So it's not just that there's this body and an ego creating music on the instrument, but it's part of a greater flow.
Do many musicians share that they notice that you know?
I haven't had too many deep discussions on that particular topic, but it's enough if we can enter the space and actually play the music. And I've certainly done enough of that with other musicians without necessarily having the conversation around it. But then the result speaks for itself, because we haven't discussed what the music is going to be. So there's no way of either of us actually knowing what the end result is going to be. And yet, as you've heard, it's very coherent and can sound as though someone's composed it. And in some way it has been composed, but not necessarily
by an individual
that can claim that. So for practical intents and purposes, we can obviously claim it because we recorded it and there's a record of it. But from a deeper perspective, we can't really claim that.
So that does take the other. Not always, though, right? But I mean, it really helps. Because, like, I could sit up here and talk into the camera alone, and I don't think I could make the same level of interest come out. But somehow, bouncing off of what you say, it seems to be even more creative.
I'd venture to say that you actually could. However, I think there's something very special in exploring it with another person, because a very important part of this is the personal experience, or the sense of personal experience of entering into that particular space. And so doing it together or in a group, then those people have perhaps a greater chance of observing that or seeing it or experiencing it or creating. So there's something very special in doing it, either conversation or creating the music with another person or a group. And in a way, it's perhaps taking what used to be a very personal spiritual practice and seeing, well, how can we apply this? And in the case of music or conversation, it can be quite special.
I would say you're really lucky when you can find someone that just wants to ease into this, like it's possible. And me too, in conversation. Just us together, for instance. Seems like a really good love, just to try something out without much forethought or expectation.
And the experience I quite often have with the music is that the piece of music is completed, it comes to a very natural close, we've recorded it, we listen back to it and have the sense of, hey, how did we do that? So we can enjoy it in the same way that an audience might enjoy it, because it's just been created there. We're hearing it for the first time.
Yeah, those are the good talks too. That's maybe why I got into this whole thing, is so I could edit and hear things again. See what a second or a third take is is like.
Yeah, these are areas really worth exploring from many different perspectives and revisiting. It's almost like going back to basics. So from one perspective, these things can seem very subtle and esoteric and refined, but from another perspective, it's as though we are really going back to basics before it all got confused, before it all got complicated. And we're being original by going back to origins, not just by being distracted by something that's new.
I probably haven't had that much touch with nature in my life.
Mm.
I've kind of preferred man. And I even remember saying, and probably still believing, that, I prefer people to dogs and cats and the animal life.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to see how I can get along with people, although maybe not very well for lots of years.
Mm. Well, I found, for example, these birds that visit here are a very nice example. They have a certain kind of dignity about them, and I'll just sit patiently and they'll be just happy to sit with you. They'll literally fly in and just sit for a while, not always looking for food.
Sometimes even now, if I'm just sitting somewhere and I would rather be more on my agenda, I could feel like, oh my, why am I just sitting,
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know, it's just all a bunch of explanations. Like if I was where I'm going to go, I could relax, but if I'm just at the beginning, I should probably leave plenty of time for the transit or so many reasonings to have a schedule.
So that can still happen, of course, but the difference is in just seeing all of that activity arising and not being completely caught up in it. So it's almost as though you're seeing this unfolding, the activity unfolding. And quite often when that happens, then you might find that it just goes more smoothly, or it might be less hectic. Or you might find that you missed the bus and it was a good thing that you missed that bus.
I don't know, that's just an overlay. I don't know, trust that one too much. But I mean, to live in society, we have to kind of do things at less of a pace, right? I mean, it's the simplest example is standing on the corner waiting for the light to turn green for us.
Mm-hmm.
When really we could have dodged across there because there was a lull in the traffic.
Mm-hmm.
So then just living in a community or being in an organization, there's always some kind of agreements that slow us down from our intended goals.
That's the case with...
That's just a part of it. It's part of the territory.
Yeah, as with everything. But that exists at every level. There are obstacles. As long as we see them as obstacles, then they're there. But really there's emotion, and it's all changing and it's all moving, and within all of that movement you're very still.
now I can do it, see, because now I'm really, I'm doing my thing, see, making a video. So now I can just be here for no reason, right?
Yeah.
But a few minutes ago, I had to get here, right?
Yeah.
So then if I look like I'm still, it's, in a way, it's fake, right?
Well,
it only works in a certain window or a certain context, you know.
So my question is, can we take that into that other situation? The one that's not quite doing exactly what you really enjoy. Can you be anywhere for no reason? And is it possible that you are anywhere for no reason?
A divine drifter. No, I probably can't, because that's why we have choice, right? You can go left or right, because we have an idea that this is a cool thing to be our activity. So then otherwise, people that have never had choices probably were, maybe there's even choice inside of an incarceration and so on, but mostly you're just in your cell until you're not. You eat when it's time, take a shower when it's time. So then there's not a lot of choice. Then you are a divine drifter.
Yeah, there always seems to be some limit on what you can do.
No matter who you are, no matter where you are.
Yeah, whatever that limit might be. Yeah. So it's how we're looking at it, that every little obstacle from here to your next place you want to be, that you need to walk around, open doors, lift things, even the weight of your body could be an obstacle to that. Could be seen that way, but it doesn't have to be, you see.
So then at a time in our lives we have a belief that somehow when we get all the root, what's the spirit, what's the underlying, when we get all that right, somehow everything is going to unfold magically. Of course it's unfolding magically now, right? But I mean,
this is the thing.
Then magically to us at that time it is interpreted as the way we want it, or even better.
It's an imagined, yeah.
So the way we want it, or something that we didn't even think of yet, but way, way better.
Yeah. Yeah. So that imagining is unfolding just as magically as whatever it is that you perceive to be experiencing as a reality.
You're saying like they're the same, right? In a way they're the same, or the same process. Like
aspects
reality is unfolding, but also your imagination of how it should be is unfolding. In
exactly the same way. And so your attention is in the imagination, and so it's then caught in that imagination, or that your attention is caught in the reality that perhaps you don't want to be in. But either way, they're both unfolding in the same magical way.
That's already a new chord in the music, right? It's kind of like the juxtaposition of how I interpret what is and how I interpret what I want. And that difference, or that space, is one of the intervals in our music of life. Usually we call that a sour note.
Well, it depends on how we resolve it, doesn't it?
If it doesn't get resolved or something, right?
So it's not necessarily which note you play, but what you do with it, I guess, in a practical sense. So if we're then translating this into practical everyday life, then we'll say, okay, this is the note that I've played in relation to what's happening around me. So first of all, you've taken credit for doing something that perhaps you haven't even done. And then what can you do with that, or what flows from that? And then how does that resolve into everything that's happening around? You see, when two instruments are playing together, they don't know what note they're going to play next. And there's no time to think about it, because they're both improvising at the same pace, which is quite often quite fast, and so many notes happening that there isn't time to stop and think what you're going to do next. So how does that harmony arise? How do all those dissonances become resolved into something that you enjoy listening to?
See, if I'm getting it now, in a way you're equalizing everything that's, we call it arising, everything that happens or appears. You're kind of equalizing. Some of them are actions, some of them are events, classified as events, something happened here. Some of them are dreams, some of them are dissatisfactions.
Mm-hmm.
Each one kind of comes up and then goes down, right?
Yeah.
Comes in and goes out.
That's it.
And then, in a way, it's a divine play, so then I said divine, doesn't have to be divine, I can drop that word out. But in a way, it's a play, it's a piece of music in a way, right?
Yeah.
It's a different movement, a different phrase, a different interval.
And what we quite often miss is the fact that as these things are arising, flowing through the awareness, is that we're grabbing at them and we want to hang on to them. And the way we do that is by turning them into concepts.
Definitely. I mean, we're grabbing them and then we're pushing them. But, I guess we turn the pushing into a concept too.
That's it.
No, I really get that. I totally get that. Because, the concept is what ties everything together. That's what makes how's the tapestry, the warp and the weft, or but the long strings are the concepts, because that is what ties today to yesterday. That, here it is again. Concept number 33 is here. And that's one of the strings in our so-called me.
It seemingly ties it together.
Yeah.
It ties it together from the perspective of the mind.
Right.
But it's not helpful once we want to perceive something beyond it. And this is what perhaps many people struggle with. So that the actual formation of a concept is a kind of grasping. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, because otherwise we wouldn't have a conversation at all without the words, and the words are all concepts.
I don't know if we know what we'd have without words. Maybe it wouldn't be on a video. It could be on a video. It would have an image.
Well, actually,
we could dance together.
Yeah.
We could have a movement together.
That's exactly what we're doing with these words.
See, because I'm wanting to ask you, okay, I'm using all these musical terms, right? Because I'm saying that the interval and the overlay, which is the chord, or the distance
harmony.
The distance between is like a fifth or a third, or it's part of an octave or something like that, right? And so then, as you go through your day, events happen, ideas happen, fears and desires happen. Each one of these is a part of music. It's one of your sounds, let's say, or the spaces and the sounds. And then you could have a day and somehow think about what each of these parts of it are. You're running to the store, you're having a coffee, you're waking up and stretching. Each one of these is somehow musical.
Well, it's a great metaphor because, the contemporary physics uses the metaphor of the universe being composed of vibrating strings of matter, and so music can be a really good metaphor. Harmony, dissonance. And when we write a piece of music down on paper, then it's taking a very, very subtle arising and simplifying it into a concept. And likewise, when we take reality, an aspect of reality, and put it down as a word.
Or a memory.
Well, let's just stick with word for the time being. Then we've done the same thing. We've packaged it, and it requires then another mind to unpackage that. And
so it's not alive, right? Because the metaphor of there's the river, but we took a bucket out of the river.
This is why these particular concepts are quite often, or can pose a challenge for people who really want to understand them.
Want to or won't?
Want to. Or perhaps even won't, but I'll just say want to, but for some reason they're frustrated in some way by not quite getting it. So they're seeking different expressions of these, call them timeless truths, in different forms, in these words and in those words, and in different combinations of words, hoping to unpack the meaning from those. In a way that the mind suddenly gets it. And
suddenly, is that an important word that you said, suddenly?
No, it's not.
I think it is important to many people, you know. It should happen suddenly, right?
Yeah.
Because then you have a big contrast and you can really super notice it.
Yeah. I think it was yesterday I said the pointer needs to be sharp enough to burst the conceptual bubble.
Right. Then you said I have to write that down, so I actually did write it down. I was in the back seat.
You did write it out, yeah. But then we don't even have to think of these things as pointers, you see, because what we do is just enter the dance, enter the music. So that these concepts and the mind is seen as part of the activity, because we seem to be viewing everything through these concepts, through this activity, and once you step back, for lack of a better term, or outside of, or above, or beyond, or deeper within, then you notice that these thoughts and the mind are all part of that activity as well, that you were previously observing through the mind.
So the activity, let's go again, the activity is just life arising?
Yeah. So everything that you're experiencing now, the sound of the birds in the background, which the listeners might be able to hear, the movement of the leaves, which the viewers might be able to see, sound of the traffic, the sound of my words, and more importantly, their own thoughts about that. Those thoughts that they're having about that are just as much part of the movement as the leaves, the cars, the birds.
That is quite step back. And yet it's all just a play, right? Because we're not getting anywhere out of it.
Yeah, play is a beautiful word. It's great. It's very, very suitable.
Adults don't have any good games, you know.
Yeah.
They got run and get money. That's a good one.
Yeah. Mm.
Run and take care of somebody, the family or something.
Mm.
Of course, if they have enough possessions, they have to take care of the possessions too. There's probably a leak in the roof somewhere, and a million things to do.
Absolutely. So can we bring this kind of inside experience, awareness, into those other things that need to be done?
Let's just say at first we'll just take a half hour out and play, try it out. Do it for nothing, and then just say, well, I don't know, maybe if we do it a couple times, we'll find ourselves doing it anyhow in some of our daily, you know, I guess it's not up to us to say that would be a good thing to do. We could just say we're having fun with it.
Yeah. You can look at it as something that's intentionally being done, or you can see it as something that's happening because the person is having an insight or is expressing an insight into this realm. So the fact that they start to meditate half an hour a day, or the fact that they take out time to do some chanting or to read some books on these topics, is an expression of that awakening. Not that they're doing that in order to have an awakening, but it's an expression of their awakening.
So you're saying they're awakened already if they start to do it. Well, yeah, that's just I get it, expression of that awakening. Expression. See, there's one. I guess we're all expressing something, but I mean, how many of us really sing?
Yeah.
Maybe we haven't sung a song since we were in church when we were a teenager and when we were singing a hymn, you know, but when does a regular person just sing it? And which is just fun, right?
You don't hear it very often.
Yeah. You sing just for the fun of it.
Yeah. So in a way we want to be creative, and we want to have creative solutions, and we want things to go in a better way, but are we allowing that to happen? Are we creating the space for that to happen? Are we encouraging that to happen?
We were just finding that everything in life could be an element for music or for a song. Or we can sing our whole life when we realize it.
In a way we are doing that. Everyone is doing that anyway. Except if something goes wrong, quite often we want to blame someone else.
Oh yeah, well that's another song, right? Hey you out there, what have you done?
Yeah, suddenly. Yeah. So there is this creativity arising all the time, even if it doesn't look creative, even if it seems to be very rational. The professor writing his theory or something has to suddenly stop when his wife calls him for dinner, as I heard someone say. Or he has to complete his work in order to do a grant submission or a funding submission. So, while aspects seem very, very rational and very structured, ultimately they're part of a bigger, larger creative flow.
So I see what we've been saying here is we're talking about creativity, and we're talking about expressing your creativity. And in a way, we're doing it from a different angle, because people will object and say, well, I'm not creative, and I have nothing to express. And so as I hear you saying that you already are expressing a creativity, and that is a creativity, and maybe it looks like somebody else, so then you say, well, it wasn't a creative, but really it is. And from that you can build, right? Once you realize I'm already doing it, then you've got no more excuse.
I think the minute that they're interested in these kinds of topics, then it's inevitable that they'll see this arising nature, and then we can call it creative. We can call it something else, of course, but in this conversation we're calling it creative. So it's not necessarily a conversation about creativity, because then people have concepts about what it is to be creative.
That's what I'm saying. We're just breaking those concepts, because we're saying creativity is what you're doing.
It is.
And we're calling that creativity. So then what else should we call it? We'll call it unfolding, or the unfoldment process.
Yeah, and there are two aspects to that. Is one, are you taking credit for that creativity? And two, are you able to just see that creativity arising?
Well, there must be something that you can do about it, because otherwise we wouldn't be talking about it. Because if it was just always arising and with no problem. So maybe you can block it, or somehow say, no, I can't do it. No, I won't try that. No, I won't do this. So then there must be some power over it, or otherwise really it would never arise to even discuss it, or even it wouldn't come up in a conversation, would it?
Yes, it might. I think it could come up either way, and it does.
So is that a misapprehension? Because before we were saying that from the point of view of thought, things look one way, like there's cause and effect, and there's needs, and there's urgencies and stuff like that. And then we're saying that from the point of view of peace, you can kind of see that's just we've assigned all those things. We've assigned the causes, and we've kind of assigned the results, and we've assigned, and we agree on it. So in a way, it's a collective force that we don't really own.
Well, continuously conceptualizing whatever it is that's arising, and then to take it a step further, we begin conceptualizing the concepts. So the whole process turns in on itself and becomes ever more complex. And hence this kind of running around in the maze of concepts, and suddenly not seeing the arising of those concepts.
In other words, you see the arising, but you say it's this. You give it a label. Now you're saying that you can see the arising with no label, or with less labels.
Yeah. Both.
Or with more than one label for every arising. 2 or 3 or 5 or 10.
Of course. Languages.
And whatever you guys want.
Yeah.
We could call it,
Yeah, well, languages prove that. Absolutely. Languages, jargon, mathematics, all kinds of, any kind of language or symbolic representation does that. It's a running commentary on reality. And then they turn in on themselves to make commentaries on their own structure.
Maybe some people would think that what we're talking about are only the subtleties, right? And some subtleties you can pull this way, pull left, pull right, pull up, pull down. And then you're just splitting hairs, right? And you're just... but really, some of the grossest things can have opposite concepts. like how we treat other people. Like when we decide to bomb another country. They got one concept about it, we got another. It's totally gross. It's not something that's just subtle.
Yeah.
And so then all these preferred interpretations are always happening.
Yeah. And war is probably the most extreme example, isn't it?
Yeah. The clouds are passing the sun, and the noises and the carpenters and the creative instinct is lit in all sides of us. And,
absolutely.
And we're just talking about each of those elements as part of our song for today. And so then we're moving our camera and refilling our tea and adjusting our exposure, and we're doing all the things to make the song the way we like. We're two sound purists, let's face it, you know. Neither of us like extraneous noises, so we're finding out what kind of music this will be. This will be another movement, right?
Yeah, and we've moved, we've changed. The sun's changed position, became very bright. We've moved. Now it's behind clouds. We spoke, construction work started, and we stopped. So those things are arising, and then we're responding to that. And it's gone very smoothly.
Yeah, we're not really saying they did it, or we're not saying nature did it to us. Of course, if it starts to rain, we might change our mind. Say, oh my God. But still, we're watching the arising and including it in our creativity.
Yeah, flowing with it, flowing around it, flowing through it.
You know, I believe we're also having experiences, you know, of deep connection, whatever that might mean, just kind of like changes in perception where things go in and out, and where I fall into your eyes. And then I'm, in a way, saying, well, I don't make anything of those things.
No.
You know, I don't make anything about it. That's just coming and going. That's arising. And I'm not saying, oh, whoopee, you know, now we're getting deep. This will be really profound.
No. It's interesting how the language works, that we say that we have a deep connection, when we could also just feel that it's there anyway, and suddenly there's an opening to that, and just a seeing of that that's there anyway. Just like when we talk about the stillness or pure awareness, or I sometimes use the words love, unconditional love, or inner peace, they're all meant to point to the same thing. That it's ever present, and then we become aware to it, or it shines through us.
I quite like those distinctions, right? That are very, very tight, you know, because we can just say something in a little bit of a wrong way, and then it takes us down a whole rabbit hole, right? But once we acknowledge it and put it up and say, then we can say whatever we want, because it doesn't really matter to say we have a deep connection, or we are the oneness, or you know, we're discovering a veil is going away of what's always here. Or I remember one time I was listening to a DVD with Ramesh, and he was saying, well, we often say something that's not true, but it doesn't interfere with us. But of course we all know it. And he was using the example, we say sunrise and sunset, and that's a good one. That doesn't really affect us at all, and we all know that it's false. The sun doesn't rise and the sun doesn't set.
But then there's no point in changing the language around that.
Yeah, it doesn't matter anymore.
Because you see what it is, and the seeing then makes the expression of that through language irrelevant.
So then it's also that we're speaking to a wide variety of people with a wide variety of experiences. So if we say, okay, we have a deep connection, then people in separation will say, well, that's cool.
Exactly.
And then if we say, oh, we're all in oneness, well, people that have melted will say, of course, you know. So, or we'll just say, I don't know, maybe there's some middle road that everybody will love. We could just say, stillness speaks.
That's a beautiful phrase. And that's exactly what's happening. Stillness is speaking. Stillness is arising. Stillness is forming. So we keep stepping through layers of concepts to see that rather than think about it.
Stepping through means like discarding them or overcoming them, or what does it mean? Stepping through layers of concepts.
It could mean just letting them be. Like being immersed in the water at the beach.
Just noticing them.
Yeah. Being immersed in the water at the beach could be a metaphor for being immersed in thought. And so as you begin to step out of the water can still be there. It doesn't need to be a problem. And then as you're out on the dry shore, the water is still there. And it's not a problem. You're just not immersed in it. So it can be there and you can be immersed in it, or it can be there and you can not be immersed in it. There's no contradiction. It's just there.
I have been thinking that it would be great if life was defined broader. That as we go into things, as we go out of things, that's all good, you know. Not saying, oh no, we're losing it. Oh yeah, we're good, getting close to it.
Yeah.
You know, and then even go a little bit wider, just for something new to happen.
So, what is a broader definition? How do you make a broader definition?
Well, you just relax. You know. Relax what's okay, right? And not really have any anxiety drive or be anxiety driven.
So when we relax, we're letting go. So it might even involve letting go of certain concepts and seeing if perhaps some other ones might arise that might be functional, or that maybe none is necessary for you to be doing what you're doing. So either you're relaxing your grip on the concept, or the concept is relaxing its grip on you. It doesn't really matter.
You talked about imperative. You know, and that kind of drives it's kind of hanging in the background, the imperative, and then kind of drives the choice mechanism. And it also drives maybe the trigger for activity. You know, it's not perfect because we always don't do what we think of, or what we think is best, or what we think we need. We don't always do it. In fact, lots of times we don't. So the imperative is not ironclad, but it's kind of like a preference, right?
Or a sense that something needs to happen.
Right. Prefer to do that over this.
Preferences.
Yeah. So kind of what I want to talk about is, what I want to bring up is temptation. Because there's a temptation to say things. There's a temptation to keep thinking things.
Absolutely. Yeah.
There's a temptation to act in certain ways and to move, to get up off your seat, right? And to actually do something. And then sometimes there's an inertia, or like a saying that, well, it's okay not to do that. And we might even call that a procrastination, and people will think I do need to do that, and then the fire of the imperative gets burning hotter, and then somehow...
Well, let's explore what you described as temptation, because that's very interesting that you made it so broad, because these things that we often don't associate with temptation are in fact in some way tempting you to give them your attention.
Exactly. That's the whole temptation right there, right?
That's it. So it doesn't have to be something which people would normally associate with temptation, but simply just notice how this thought that's coming up, whatever it is about, is seeking your attention. And this is happening all the time with various thoughts. When you feel undecided, should I do this or should I do that?
Right. So then, okay, let's put it out there. Thoughts come up, thoughts go down, thoughts come up, thoughts go down. Now, in a way, each thought is saying, stay with me, stay with me, stay with me, no,
Sure.
Stay with me. You know, and then you're either tempted or not, you know, depending on this imperative that you've already set, which is kind of like your key, how you set yourself, right?
Yeah.
Is that a good way to start?
Well, you're implying that someone might have the luxury of actually seeing it in that way. I agree that could be a really good description of what's happening, but it happens so quickly that people aren't even aware that it's happening more often than not.
Well, in an analysis, we need to stretch.
Absolutely.
We need to stretch
That's what we're
time and
doing.
stretch it out.
Yeah,
right?
that's what we're
and
doing.
We want to say, well, what's in there? What and all these little quick movements.
Yeah.
Let's look at all. Hey, look, there's lots more movements than I thought in there. You know,
Absolutely.
There's all kinds of decisions and preferences and things going on there. It's not just a bingo go. And then, so that's what we're doing, right?
Yeah, we're stretching it out. Yeah, creating space for it. Looking at it in slow motion.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so anyone who's viewing this or listening to this can have a look for themselves at their own thought process and just see how quickly the attention is drawn into it. And just notice those thoughts that are coming up that might be competing for attention or trying to distract you, or making some comment, or making some judgment or some criticism.
Yeah. Okay, the fastest temptations are the reactions.
Yes.
Then the responses are a little bit slower, right? So that we have a little bit more measure there, we can kind of look them over. The reactions have a huge imperative behind them.
But just about everybody can look at it in hindsight, at least. Eventually you can look at it in hindsight. If you've reacted angrily, then it might take a week, but a week later you can still look at it in hindsight, and so you can begin the process there. And then eventually you might be able to look at it within a split second, and eventually you might be able to see it as it's arising.
eventually maybe you'll know its number, you know, and
Yeah.
you say, I know you. I know the way you work.
That's right. And no longer you're not angry anymore. You're laughing just like you are.
You're a trickster, you.
That's it. And so what made you angry is actually now you're laughing at it.
So the temptations are to think a thought, are to say, well, the first one then is to react. The first temptation is to react, and it doesn't even sound like a temptation until you pulled it out.
Yeah.
So then the temptation is to think a thought, and then it's to, defend yourself as a temptation, right?
This is quite often what's happening on an everyday level. It's just the quick reactions, and reactions quite often to protect oneself or one's sense of worth.
So then we don't hardly see where the temptation to think a thought is, you know, because it's being already thunk, right? But I mean, somehow there's an imperative behind that thought that says this is interesting, and all the other ones aren't. And then, but we do kind of see temptation in as far as saying something to somebody, saying that thought, because there are people that every time they have a thought, it comes out their mouth, right? And then some people that don't let anything out. They're totally non-expressive, and they just boil inside.
It's like having the horn of your car wired directly to the accelerator. You want to move forward, so immediately the horn starts blowing for people to get out of the way. That's unfortunately, being reactive like that is not helpful. But anyway, even someone who's reactive can reflect on this.
Then you have a temptation when you think you're right, because you think, God, I'm so right this time. I really got to express this. And that guy's so wrong. He needs to know this.
There's a temptation. There's an energy arising. But we don't see that energy arising because we're so caught in the thought forms and the temptation to make the correction and the temptation to perhaps enter a disagreement or an argument or a conflict, that we don't notice the whole energy that's arising or how it can be avoided or resolved or have it not arise in the first place.
So then, have we ever won over any temptation, or do we follow them all? I mean, okay, there's lethargic people and people that are non-expressive and people that are afraid of making an error and stuff like that, and they might not go on any temptation. But then a lot of people, I don't know, whatever pops in their head, they want to be on to doing, right? If they got enough money, they do it.
Yeah, but I think...
Do we ever deny ourselves of a temptation, or do we say, no, we deserve to have them all? We just say, I've been denied so much as a child, now I'm going to give myself everything that pops in my mind. Or what.
I'm sure some people do, but it probably takes the focus away from what's ultimately important and the setting within which these temptations are arising. So whether the temptation is there or whether it isn't there, whether it's for one thing or whether it's for another thing, there's some unnameable context within which that is arising. And so a large part of my interest in having these conversations is for the thoughts and the concepts to somehow create an opening, fall away, or to express that particular broader context of inner peace or pure awareness or stillness. So that if we're talking about the temptation or not temptation or competing temptations, having that conversation, we're aware that there is this backdrop against which it's happening, out of which it's arising. And so once we move into that space of that, from where it's arising, then the conversation about it seems to answer itself. We're no longer trying to answer it from an intellectual perspective. It's almost as though it begins to resolve itself.
Isn't it kind of like when we're stepping back there, or aware of that greater context? Isn't it kind of like we're, again, stretching out the temptation, and we're seeing all the integral movements and energies in the process, and then we can just know it better and know and see it coming on before we're already doing it, and somehow make a decision, like, oh, I don't need this one. And then another one, and I don't need that either, actually.
Yeah, because they
it's
know
not about not doing any of them.
Yeah.
One of them you're going to do for sure.
Yeah. You'll be doing something.
Even if it's very subtle.
Yeah. Yeah. We're all doing something.
At all times. So one temptation we took.
But we might not need to see it as a temptation. Then we can just see it as we're very much in the moment, and the words are arising, and this activity is arising, and so it's no longer a temptation. When we fall back into concepts, then we think of, okay, well, this thought is wanting our attention, that thought is wanting our attention. So actually then analysing what's going on in the mind.
Well, then, okay, let's say we can call it a, like a pre-kinetic thought, a thought before a movement, and inspires something, action, right? A saying or something. But at least what we're trying to do is stretch it out enough so that they're somehow appropriate. I'm hungry, go get food, Somebody shouts at me, it's not necessarily shout back. It's not even necessarily take off and leave them.
That's right.
You can just see what's appropriate for the moment.
You might not need to do anything at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. But at least having that awareness that, this is arising and I've reacted. Being aware that you've been reactive. Being aware that you've been tempted by this thought as opposed to that thought. And then being aware that then that's happening within this wider field of stillness, or pure awareness.
What are we doing anyhow? You guys are thinking we're crazy, right? Because who's going to take this much time about every action? But I don't know. We're just stretching it apart and saying, well, what's it made of? Is there any choice points in there? Right? I mean, it kind of is a useful way to say this is a way to look at things. And once you know it, the choice points are lots of them. Like, first of all, you don't have to think thoughts, or when they come up, you don't have to follow them and embellish them. And so then that way you're staying in a meditative or a more free state that people say, people suggest try it. You might like it. You don't have to do actions, right? You don't have to react to people because somehow you gave it some time, or you took a pause, or you... So then it's not that your life is going to unfold at this pace. It's just that you're going to take a few times at this pace to notice exactly how it functions, and then say, oh, I got your number now, so I know what I can and can't do. I'm not just at the effect of a ball rolling down a hill. I'm actually...
It's not as though we have to suddenly do everything in slow motion.
Right.
We have the opportunity to sit here and take our time around this conversation. But then there are other times when we need to be moving pretty quickly. But we can still be aware that we're in that stillness while we're moving quickly. And someone else might think, oh, Richard's stressed, whereas he's just moving quickly and he's quite aware that he's in that stillness. And he's quite aware that everything is just moving around that stillness, including his own body.
We're each such a mystery. I'll tell you, it's amazing. Everybody's such a mystery. And sometimes we can enter into this space where there are no words, and then sometimes words arise. Let's just look in the camera for a while and see if people are getting us. Yes. Kind of think there's some way to live, right? Sometimes I feel that in myself, and I don't know, people share that there's probably some way to live, but I don't know, I guess I don't think I can imagine living any other way than I'm living today, for today. Right? I can't really have any other desire, like, to be different or to spend more or less money, or to have possessions or not.
It can't be any different. But it will be, and it is. Yeah, it can't be.
Yeah. Like I never bought a lottery ticket in my life, you know, because I don't think I'd really want to win, you know. course, I don't want to lose either.
Hmm.
That would be the many thousands of times, but I don't want to win even once.
Hmm. We'll see. If you do and you win, well, that's what will happen.
It'll be rough if I don't buy any tickets.
I see we've got some construction work happening again.
Yeah. Let's go over and pound a few nails. Thanks so much, Jarek. Thanks for this visit that's happening in these couple days, and
it's been beautiful.
It really has been beautiful to meet you and be with you. And
yeah.
All right. For you too. Okay, bye.